This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Ever wondered if your supplements are actually helping, or are they just expensive fillers? Today's guest, James Garland, went from a devastating health crisis to leading marketing for a respected supplement company. We get into what most people get wrong about nutrition, how modern food lost nutrients, and how to choose supplements that actually work. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please welcome James to the show. James, welcome to the show. It's great to have you, and thank you so much for spending some of your time with us today.
Thanks, Artis. Really pleased to be here. I had a great conversation with you earlier. Looking forward to another.
Man, I tell you what, there's a lot to talk about. And if you've been paying attention to the show, we've been really focusing a lot on how do we get better. So everything from our mental health to our sleep to breath work. We've talked about our physical health and exercise. And one of those things that is part of that is the way we think about our nutrition and how our body uses things like vitamins and supplements. And so this is going to be really, really cool because I think it ties in so closely to what we've been talking about here on the show so far.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head with some of my favorite topics right off the bat. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. That's what I live for, is to teach and talk about those topics. So should be
well,
fun.
you know, I love to have maybe go backwards a little bit to get forward. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do today, and we'll dig at it a little bit.
Sounds good. James Garland. I'm the VP of marketing for a dietary supplement company right now, Pure TheraPro RX. Don't let the RX confuse you. It's not pharmaceuticals. Like, we make what I would say are some of the world's best dietary supplements, but we can maybe dig into that later. As a VP of marketing, and it's been a long time getting into, this role and that title. I've been in health and wellness for, I want to say 22 years, just off the top of my head. I was dead set on doing home theater installations for rich and famous people when I was younger. That's what I was going to do. I was going to hook up their networked receivers and theaters and speakers and projector screens, and I loved it.
Wow.
And I got West Nile virus when I was 23. I believe I was 23 up in Minnesota, and it knocked me out. It sounds like you might have a question on that.
I do. Like, you're in Minnesota and you get West Nile?
That's
so
it was
bizarre,
a mosquito.
Right?
Yeah, it was a mosquito. I think I know the one that got me. I was helping a friend move into an apartment, and I had a sofa in my arms, and I felt a bug on my calf. I'm wearing shorts, and I looked down, and there's a big old mosquito on my leg. And I thought, well, I can't drop this sofa. I guess I just got to let it bite me. And sure enough, that night, I mean, within 6 hours, I was as sick as I'd ever been in my life. I knew by 9 p.m. that, oh man, I am under the weather here. And by midnight, I knew that I wasn't going to make it into work the next day. And by 2 a.m, I knew I was sicker than I'd ever been. And it was, I'm sure we could talk for 2 hours about that, but it would sort of stop us from getting into other topics. But let's just say that was the impetus, like having my health just like the rug just pulled from under my feet. Because it really wrecked my immune system, my energy, mitochondrial health, brain, like vision and hearing, and everything was pretty off for a while. And that was my, being desperate to get my health back was the impetus to get into this vertical. Supplements, diet, educating people, educating myself, working with doctors and physicians and functional medicine practitioners. It was the start of everything. And so for 22 years, I changed career paths, took a big pay cut, decided to go work at a health food store because it was the fastest, like easiest way for me to break into this vertical where health was the focus. Right. And just, over 22 years, just worked my way up, learning to be a copywriter, learning to manage, Meta, Facebook and Instagram ads, learning to manage graphic design teams, and I could go on, but and yeah, now I kind of run the marketing ship for this wonderful company that I'm at now. And it's been a heck of a ride. I'll answer any questions you have on it, but I feel like I'm rambling a little.
No, I think the background is always really important because, when you think about people and career paths as an example, typically, almost always, there's something that happens that kind of sparks something and people move in that and towards that career.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to things that are health related, until or unless you have a health crisis, sometimes it's really hard to appreciate what it is to be healthy, and what it's like and what the world changes to when you're not healthy and you're kind of trying to figure it out, right? And so, I had a would-be health issue several years ago now, but that period of time where you're unsure what's going to happen next, you really start to think about, am I doing what I want to do? Am I doing the thing that is going to be most impactful for me? And so it makes sense that you would have something that would kind of push you in that direction. What's interesting is that as you started to think about getting into the vertical, there's two paths, I guess, major paths. The first path is to become some sort of provider. And the other path is to start to figure out how you educate people around the things. And it feels like you went towards that path of how can I start to educate people around a thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was trying to get my health back, and desperate is the word I would describe, I would use to describe myself back then. I was desperate to get my health back. I would have given anything, my car, anything to get my health back. And so when I thought about like, where can I learn about health? I don't want to make myself sound ancient. I'm 44, but 22 years ago, the internet was a resource, but it was kind of it was a bit like it was the Wild West back then. And frankly, we just didn't know we didn't know then what we know now. And like parsing information and looking up information, everything's so much easier now, especially with LLMs and AI.
Yeah.
So back then, when I thought about where do healthy people go, it wasn't the doctor's office for me anyway. It was the health food store. And so I got a job and I started reading books, and I started trying different modalities and therapies out, like just kind of guinea pigging myself. I would I'm going to try the master cleanse. I'm going to try the blood type diet. I'm going to be a blogger for this doctor and network with people. And yeah, that was where I got my start.
And as you were trying to experiment, because you're right in that the world of being able to self-help, or at least find information, continues to get better and better. I think we went through a period where it was hard to find information because in the early days of the internet, so we're not that far apart. I'm 48, you're 44, so we kind of grew up around the same time. You used the internet for things like article finds, which were like scientific type things that were vetted. There weren't a lot of them available, but you could kind of be assured that the information you were getting was actual scientific information that made sense, right? And then we have kind of grown into, well, everybody can put something on the internet. So now it gets harder to know, am I looking at something that's really good information, or is it somebody's opinion? And now we're kind of seeing, with AI in particular, aggregation of data in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And so it's helping us make informed decisions about more of the information that we're finding, since it's not necessarily all source information anymore. But it's a really big deal.
Yeah, certainly. Back then, as you say, it was difficult because if you weren't just looking up an article, oftentimes you'd find yourself in like just a chat room, where people are sort of extolling the virtues of a product or a diet, and you'd read it and sometimes just get like indoctrinated, like, oh my gosh, I need to be a vegan, or oh my gosh, I need to stare at every sunset, because that's the key to health. That's what's going to fix me. And yeah, I'm not ashamed to say I got caught up in a few, I don't want to say bad ideas, but I got caught up in a few things that I thought would help that actually did more harm than good. And I suppose that, everything has its purpose, and it helped teach me, and it helped me teach others. But yeah, let's just say that young people today, and, all of us, older people our age, I think when it comes to information, wow, we have got it a lot easier now than we did back then.
Yeah, for sure. And with that information, there's a lot of it that I spend time parsing, and I'm sure others do as well, because we all know that some form of physical activity is good for us.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be debates on which physical activity, but we all know that moving is better than not moving,
Yeah.
right? Then we kind of stack on top of that. Well, we also have to eat well. So there's debate on exactly what healthy eating is, but everybody can kind of agree that there's some form of healthy eating that you have.
Yeah, man.
And then once you get past the eating well, it starts to fall apart, right? Because you go from kind of these are the basic things that we know work well to then how do I become the best version? Can I optimize these things? You hear biohacking a lot, right? And that's where I kind of think about, well, are there supplements that help? Are there things that I'm missing from the nutritional element that I need to add in? And I think a lot of people are kind of in that category, and there's tons of stuff to choose from out there, and maybe not all the best resources of trying to figure out what is best on my own.
I agree with you. So I could not have said that better. Everybody knows that they should move, whether it's sprinting or high intensity or, CrossFit. We could literally talk about that for hours, and we won't get into that. And then same with diet, should you be a raw foods vegan or a fruitarian or a carnivore, or just take it easy and be gluten-free? There's so many different modalities and paths to follow there. We could get sucked into a 4-hour conversation about that. I'd love to do that with you sometime, but again, we'll spare your listeners for now. But the next thing you mentioned is, what can we do after that? Let's say we are moving, whether it's running or whatever, and we are what we feel is eating well. Mm-hmm. After that, if you want to optimize health, my belief is that you do need supplements. However, I also believe that most supplements will not help you optimize your health. They simply won't, because of, again, it's difficult for me not to talk for 2 hours about these subjects because they're so laden with nuance and deep. But a lot of supplements are fake or made with ingredients that don't help you or do harm. In my career, I've always been very careful to avoid those things for myself, but also not to work. I don't want to be employed by a company that, or dependent on a company that is putting things together that I have to sell that I don't like. I've been in that position before, long ago, before I was ever in this vertical. And, I don't ever want to sell something that's unethical or that I don't agree with. I guess the last thing I'll say before I get back to you on that is, min-maxing is a term I often hear said, or that I use myself. And it essentially means, like, how can I, to the nth degree, minimize any harm and maximize any gain or benefit, right? Mm-hmm. I've got a video game over my shoulder here. A lot of video gamers use this term, like, if I'm playing this game, how can I min-max my performance so that I get all the best equipment and the most points, and I get the furthest without losing any health or losing any resources? You know what I mean? People can approach life that way, and gamers often do. I just want to say, I don't think it's possible to min-max a human life. I think if you try, your life is going to be completely taken over by avoiding things that could perceivably be bad for you and focusing on things that you believe are good for you, but to the detriment of really just missing out on life. So I believe that this needs to be approached with tolerance and balance and, let's say, moderation. Like, moderation in all things, I think, is a really smart saying. I'm sure it's a little cliche, but don't when it comes to moving and eating and then supplementation, don't try to min-max your health, or you're going to end up like those people who, they stop eating at 11 a.m. and they only eat raw foods, and they they take 1 gram of this at 4 and then their alarm goes off at 5 and they drink that, that's not a life. That's that's a computer program.
The way you explain that is very much the way I approach it and think about it too, right? Like at some point, there are so many variables that we encounter on a daily basis that you can't control for all of the variables. And then you take that out over the course of several days, months, years. There's just no way to control all those things. Mm-hmm. So you have to balance what you are trying to do, what you're trying to achieve against those things that you are able to consistently control in order to get you to the best version of you that you can get. And you're exactly right. When people kind of set themselves up for, I'm going to make this perfect and I'm going to control it all, mm-hmm. it becomes something that's unsustainable. And so they are very likely to not be able to do any of it. And so then they don't do any of it. Right. Yeah. And so you never want to be in that particular type of zone if you're trying to figure out how you're going to make yourself healthier. One of the things you said, though, I think is interesting is you believe in supplementation because we're not necessarily getting all those things that we need from the foods that we eat. Talk a little bit more about that, though, because there's some reasoning behind that, given the way we kind of look at nutrients and soils and that sort of thing, really, when it comes to things that we grow or eat, right?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to delve into that. So let me. This is off the top of my head, and sorry if I don't say it perfectly, but let me give an example of the way I approach that thinking. If you, right after our call, hang up and decide to open up a package of grass-fed beef, right, and maybe grill yourself a burger. Maybe it's lean, 93%, grass-fed, pasture-raised, never even been inside a barn, beautiful weather. And then along with that burger patty, let's say you have some cooked beets and an orange, kind of a weird meal, but just play along. That cow ate grass, right? And the beet was grown in soil and the orange was grown in soil, presumably, unless it's like hydroponic, and it was shipped to your area. 100 years ago, if your ancestor ate that same exact meal, you can probably tell where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. That beef would be higher in super omega-6 fatty acids like conjugated linoleic acid, omega-6. It'd be higher in vitamin K2. It'd be higher in trace minerals like manganese, and it would actually be lower in heavy metals like aluminum and arsenic and things like that. And then same with the orange. I want to say 100 years ago, an orange had like 8 times the vitamin A that they do have today. And beets, you look at beets, we think of beets as wonderful for boosting nitric oxide and so full of antioxidants. Well, they had a lot more of those properties and a lot more of those minerals and vitamins and therefore micronutrients like antioxidants and phenols back then. Mm-hmm. But we have depleted our soil. We have sprayed jet fuel and toxins and pesticides. I mean, I could go on and on about this all over our wildlands and our fields. And, over generations and generations, we're using diesel tractors to, drive between the orange groves.
Oh, that's a really good point.
And there's lead in the diesel and there's chemicals in the pesticides. And even if it's organic, there's drift and it still takes machinery and oil. And, I go on and on, but suffice it to say, the nutrients in our food today are lower than they were 100 years ago. And the toxins in our food today are higher than they were 100 years ago. And that's a real problem because when you consume toxins, whether it's in your air, your food, your water, or personal care products, wherever it is, your body now has an increased nutritional requirement to methylate and deal with those toxins, to trap them, to bind them, to break them down, and eventually, hopefully expel them, whether it's, in the bathroom or through the sweat or whatever it is. So we're getting lower nutrition and less exercise and more EMF and Wi-Fi and pollution than we ever have before. But this lower nutrition makes it harder to deal with that. Now, I haven't even mentioned stress and water quality and traffic. And, there's just so many more influences on us that are negative. That's why I feel that supplementation is more important now than it's ever been in human history. I probably rambled there, but hopefully I made point.
I think that the breadth of the example is really important because we often lose track of how things change over time, particularly as we've gone through industrialization and we've changed the way that we interact with the environment. I was having a conversation not too long ago around how complex it is to deliver the volume of food that we have to the people that need it. Right. Mm-hmm. And because of that complexity, we've made all kinds of advancements in how we grow food. But what's really interesting is that the very basis of the food, the soil we grow it in, there's big changes. Right. And so, we used to, I remember being in grade school and you're in biology class and you're talking about rotating the crops, right? Mm-hmm. So you grow corn this year, but next year you don't grow corn in the same place. You grow beans because mm-hmm. beans need something different than corn. And that was really a way for us to make sure we weren't stripping the nutrients out of the soil and having to try to add it back with other things. Mm-hmm. But to your point, because of the way we farm things, we're constantly adding things we don't realize are going back in there and really changing the way the food is produced and the nutritional value of that food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wish I could have been in that conversation because it sounds like a great one. In addition to that, as we like learn to better factory farm, we have to pick the food earlier, right? Because it's got to be shipped all the way from Florida clear to Oregon or over the ocean.
Great point.
So, 100 years ago, maybe the orange was picked like the day you ate it or day before, maybe 2 days before. Now it's picked like 2 weeks before it's even ripe. It's green when they pick it. They put it in trucks. They gas it with this gas to artificially ripen it. So it really doesn't even have time to mature and like sort of like develop the nutritional profile that it would need for us to really benefit from it. But yeah, that's a huge conversation, and I think it's bigger than even we could cover in 5 podcasts. But again, I think it just goes back to that point that supplements, like supplementing it doesn't even have to be something from a bottle, but supplementing your life with extra nutrition, extra self-care, an Epsom salt bath in filtered water, just supplementing your life with mm-hmm. things that promote health is more important now than it was 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. And so life is getting busier and more hectic and more expensive, but that self-care is getting more important too. And so I just encourage people that maybe are getting caught up in the grind or spending too much time going out on the town to look inward and, maybe stay at home and take a bath and drink some filtered water, have a cup of tea, and maybe take your vitamins.
So, I mean, this is so interesting to me to kind of think about, because now as we're thinking about supplements and you start to think about, well, man, which ones of those things do I need? Mm-hmm. And once I kind of figure that out, are they all the same? So let's go back to the orange example, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're thinking about the orange, comparing oranges from 100 years ago to oranges that were picked yesterday, we're thinking about the vitamin content of those oranges, and it's decreased several fold. So now we've got several fold less of vitamin C in the orange, and we're gonna now supplement that. There has to be some guidance around, well, how much do I actually need? So got to figure out how to determine that. And then there is probably a little bit of difference. No, I shouldn't say a little bit. There's probably differences in the way that supplements are absorbed. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how much do I need? Am I getting enough? Let me take this supplement. Then you got to kind of think about, well, is this supplement actually being absorbed? So am I getting what I think I'm getting out of this thing? How do you think about those two pieces together?
Yeah, how I think about it, you've opened a can of worms, but I'm glad you did.
Uh-oh.
How I think about it is probably different than everyone else thinks about it, but I'd love to share, how I feel. So when the company I work for, awesome company, by the way, let's say we make 29 different products. If you
Okay.
include like different sizes and different strengths, then it's even more. But there's 29 different products, and every one of them is awesome, and we made it for a reason. And I would argue that every one of them is like the best version of that nutrient or of that formula that you can get. But but it would also be kind of bonkers if you took them all, or even 2/3 of them, right? Like that's a lot of supplements. How are you?
Mm-hmm.
Again, are you trying to min max your life here? Are you overdoing it? How are you managing and even remembering like what you took and when, and should those be taken together? But let me backtrack a little. So, what nutrients we need? I think for a long time was just common sense, right? Like you should eat some protein. I don't, I've been a vegan and a vegetarian before. I'm not anymore, just to be transparent. And I'm sure you have some listeners that are, or perhaps you've dabbled with it yourself. So I don't want to say you need to eat meat. I think there are many people that say, actually, you don't. You can do this and this, and I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say you need to eat some protein. You've got like your body requires these 18 amino acids, right? And your body requires like a well-rounded supply. Most people would agree of fruits and vegetables. I know there's a big carnivore movement right now, and again, I respect that. I think carnivore can take you a long way if you have like a lot of weight to lose, or if you have severe autoimmune or digestive issues, because it's kind of the ultimate elimination diet, right? And so I think a lot of people have wild success on carnivore in the short term, but I don't necessarily personally feel that it's appropriate for long term. I think once you heal your gut, you kind of calm down that immune system and maybe get rid of the autoimmunity. Then I personally do not feel that it's necessary. But yeah, like fiber, fruits, vegetables, protein, and hydration, with some sunlight for vitamin D. That for, centuries took us a long way. And in 1941, this was kind of in the middle of World War II in Europe, but it was right when the U.S. was getting heavily involved, and we were experiencing, I don't want to say famine here in the U.S., but many people don't realize that 80 short years ago, we were getting involved in a huge war, and the United States citizenry was on ration cards, right? Like, people had to like give up their gold, and they had to use ration cards to get their bread and chocolate and coffee and things like that. And at that time, how much food and which food a household got, they were trying to figure that out. And the way they did that was to put together a panel of scientists, right? And not all of them were scientists. Some of them were just, let's say, professionals in the health field. And they commissioned this task force, we'll call it, with putting together the RDI, the recommended daily intake of 8 vital nutrients. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the RDI is based on the amount of nutrients that a human needs. And when I say a human, I mean 98% of the population at the time, irregardless of sex or age or size or weight or anything like that. So it was not one size fits all, but they needed to simplify it, and so they just kind of made it one size fits all. And here's the part I consider shocking. The RDI, the recommended daily intake, right? Like it's a recommended daily intake from the United States government. And so most people would think that's the amount I need to be healthy. It's what the US government recommends. But I think what people don't realize, and they're actually quite transparent about this, if you actually, have the time to read into it, is that it was never about optimizing health. It was only about providing the bare minimum of an essential nutrient to keep you from getting a deficiency disease, right? So I could go on. If you're interested, I'll talk more
Well,
about that. But
I mean, but it's a really interesting thing to think about because I I think it draws strong parallels to BMI, right? So body mass index, it was we look at that and we kind of look at the lines and we say if you're above the line, not good. If you're below the line, not good. You should be somewhere in this thing. But it wasn't really taken in consideration if you carry a lot of muscle mass and if you are a very athletic person, like where does it kind of fit in there? And the measurements were done on people who we would look at today and say, well, wow, they weren't really the best estimates for using to
Yep.
determine what the mass index. So it sounds like the averaging for RDI kind of put it into something very similar.
Yeah, and they, you know, whole other rabbit hole, but they did the same thing with blood pressure. They did the same thing with cholesterol. They set these, you know, the numbers are arbitrary, but they're one size fits all. It doesn't matter what blood type you are or what country you came from or if you're male or female or how old you are. But if your blood pressure is over that, it's bad. You know, that's not something. I'm not, you know, I'm not a cardiologist, but I've been in this vertical for 22 years. I've worked in doctors' offices. I've consulted with hundreds, if not thousands, of patients and clients. Yeah, I can't say I agree with that. Not at all. It's never, one size fits all is rarely, whether it's BMI or blood pressure, it's rarely the fix.
Well, you know, there's a lot of things that are kind of built that way we don't think about all the time, right? So when U.S. farmers were making a lot of extra corn, the government needed to kind of figure out, well, what do we do with that? And so then we started using corn for fuel. And so now you put corn in gasoline, you raise the octane, we use corn for fuel. We were making extra wheat. What do? We kind of make the pyramid look different. And so grains become more important because we got extra wheat. And so there are a lot of things that come into recommended values for things or utilization for things that we grow based on kind of excess and short supply, right? And so it's this wouldn't be a shocker if you kind of see it in the big global, but it is one of those things that's interesting because people kind of take it as law, right? Like if this is recommended, it comes from then this must be right. And so you kind of set up your life around that. But I bet you're going to tell me that that RDI is probably not the best way to think about it when you're trying to optimize or get fair enough.
It's exactly what I would say. So again, you know, the RDI for vitamin C was set to be just enough to keep the average U.S. citizen from getting scurvy. That's it. Like it was just enough to make sure that your body could produce enough collagen to keep you from getting a disease where you got lesions on your skin because you simply aren't producing enough collagen to regenerate your skin. But when it comes to an optimal amount of vitamin C, like enough to, let's say, power the Krebs cycle and be an antioxidant and keep your immune system up while keeping your pH balanced, like none of that was even remotely considered. Same thing with vitamin D. The RDI for vitamin D was set just enough to keep you from getting rickets, you know, a severe deficiency disease impacting the skeletal system. And it went on and on. You know, vitamin A, I think, was just enough to keep you from going blind. And iron was just enough to keep you from getting anemia and so on. But, you know, these nutrients, there's that bare minimum you need to live without a disease, at least in the short term, you know, while we're on rations. But then there's an optimal amount. Like we talked about earlier, like how can you optimize your health with nutrition? Like, sure, there's an amount of protein that your body needs to not waste away. Let's say that's 12.5 grams a day, right? But what if you got 60? Is that much better? Is that still not enough? I think that's what we've, you know, some of this we've known for decades, but some of it, I mean, it's 2025 and we still, a lot of us, we don't know what to eat. We don't know what to take. And I think that just speaks to sort of our infancy, like as humans, right? Like, we're wonderful, we're intelligent, but we're also like profoundly confused, and we need some answers, and we're trying, we're looking. But yeah, the RDA and the RDI are really fascinating because they're just enough to not get a disease. And so what I would encourage your listeners to look into is called the optimal daily intake. This is a term sort of coined by the functional medicine community. I want to say it came about in the 1998, like the late 90s, when functional medicine was really just starting to kind of enter the mainstream. And it turns out like I'm saying this off the top of my head. It's been a while since I actually looked at the numbers, but like your medical doctor who's still working off the RDA and let's say allopathic medicine guidelines might tell you, okay, if your vitamin D3 is at 11 to 30, what is it? Nanograms per milliliter, I believe it is. Yeah. Then you're healthy and you're in the optimal range. Whereas if you walked into a functional medicine office, I used to work in one for a really intelligent woman who had a world famous practice. If you walked into that office and your vitamin D was at the maximum, like if your vitamin D was a 30, it would be like, oh my, that's one of the first things we need to address. You are so far below the optimal, the optimal level. And so, there's sort of like your standard American diet, your standard allopathic, doctor's office would tell you, here's the range for calcium, here's the range for vitamin D, and on and on. And then you have your functional medicine, which I would consider much more, I'm going to say just much more in tune with, optimal health and more advanced when it comes to like the latest science and the latest clinical trials and the latest understanding of disease and how to treat it. And so, I would encourage everybody look into the optimal daily intake. And when you do labs, when you're discussing your blood work with your doctor, whether it's iron or vitamin D3 or even B12, if they have a mind to test that, see what they say about it, but then go compare that. You could even ask Grok or ask ChatGPT. What is the RDA for these nutrients or these labs? But what's the optimal daily intake based on like the latest science from the functional medicine world? And compare the two. And then, that's a good conversation starter.
Yeah, because when you get labs, I mean, I think everybody's gotten labs back before and they've got the green zone or the stuff that's between the lines where if it's in there, it gets a green. If it's outside of that one way or the other, it gets a little yellow. And then if it goes way outside, it gets a red, right? And there are instances because of the way we've traditionally approached even things like vitamin E is a great one, that you can be within the green lines in the report. But when you start to really get into it and dig into it, you're probably still very low compared to what would be the best. But the lab result, the test is not going to tell you that. You're going to have somebody who's willing to help you explain or willing to explain that to you and help you kind of make better decisions.
Right.
So assume for a minute that we found one of those folks and they say, man, looking at this, you need to have a vitamin D3 supplement, and they give you a dosage to do. You're like, yippee, let me go, or we can pick anything. It can be calcium, and you're gonna go out and you're gonna get this thing, right? So now you've armed yourself with I need this, and you're gonna go to a store, probably a health store, maybe a grocery store. You're gonna ask somebody, hey, where's this? They're gonna tell you. You're gonna pick it up. How do then I start to make decisions about which one of them I'm going to get? Because if you ever been to look, I mean, there's a sea of products with seemingly the same name, and you get to pick which one you want. How do you start to think about that?
That's a wonderful question. And it's also a challenging one to answer. And the reason I say that is the way I think about this, I have the privilege and background, like 20 plus years in the vertical, where my whole life's work has been learning about nutrients and understanding them and studying the different forms and, learning about them so that I can better write about them and work with founders of companies to develop products that include the best forms. And, so I have a very different understanding of it. But if you are like, you might be the greatest lawyer in the country or the greatest optometrist in the country, but not really know anything about the different forms of vitamin D or vitamin E. And so if you walk into a health food store and expect to be able to navigate the shelves, I would say you've probably got another thing coming. You're probably not going to be able to,
Right.
And it's just like if I put you on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and said, okay, sail here, I would be doomed. I would have no idea how to sail, right? Like, and I'm probably not going to figure it out after messing with things for a few hours. I'm probably just going to fall overboard. So what I encourage people to do is, for goodness sakes, work with somebody who's a professional, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so, like when you first start, sometimes that's me 15, 16 years ago, the guy or gal in the vitamin aisle, because, and you want to be careful because sometimes, like, I think in the world of humanity, whether people do the right thing or the wrong thing is often, it boils down to the incentives, right? Like, and so if you're buying a TV at a big box store, is the representative you're talking to selling you the best TV for you? Or are they selling you the one with the highest gross margin, the one that they have too many of and that their sales manager told them to push? You don't know. Yeah. I mean, and even if you ask them, are they incentivized to tell you the truth? I mean, that's kind of up in the air. And so what I'm going to say is find somebody you trust and work with them. You can also, thankfully, LLMs like ChatGPT and Grok and, there's Myriad, DeepSeek, there's so many of them out there right now. They're getting really good at scanning the web, sort of, Reddit, Twitter, Google, like medical journals, and kind of crowdsourcing really good usable information. So before you even walk into a health food store, you can say, hey, Grok, hey, ChatGPT, I need to buy a vitamin D. I want to buy the right one for me. What are the 10 things I need to consider? And what are the 3 questions I should ask, the employee of the health food store? Or I don't know if it's advanced enough to start like saying, like recommending products. I think that can be gamed at this point, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like SEO is a thing, right? Like if you ask Google what is the best office chair, the first result is not necessarily the best office chair. The first result is the person who paid the most to bid on the keyword best office chair. Or the first organic result, and by organic, I mean not paid for, sponsored. The first organic result is the person who played the SEO game, search engine optimization game, the best. Again, it's probably not the best office chair. It's just the one that, based on like page structure and site load speed and domain authority and number of backlinks, it's the one that Google's machine mind thinks that you will click, right? Because it believes that it has the information you're looking for based on this like set of criteria that its algorithm sort of feeds on.
And that's kind of annoying too, because you get there and you're like, I know for sure that's not the best chair. But I get your point though, that it's very difficult to in general say these are the 5 things you need to look at. But I do think there are generalizations around maybe why it's important to do the research that can be boiled down, right?
Yeah,
so,
let me,
because I think there's a way to help people, to push people in the right direction.
Yeah. And I sort of failed to give advice there. Like, so my advice was work with somebody that you trust, whether it's a person in a vitamin aisle or a company, and then talk to an LLM, right? But once you get to the store, I think the important thing is to look at the label. And if I'm going to give advice on vitamin D or vitamin E or vitamin C, I'm going to tell you one of the easiest things that you can do is look at the form of the nutrient, right? And this, everybody's got a smartphone now. If it says magnesium oxide, right? And you're wondering, is this the magnesium I should take? And then this other one says magnesium lysate, glycinate, chelate. I don't know which, off the top of my head, of course I know which one's better, but if I'm a layperson and I'm just not schooled on forms of magnesium, like organic acids versus mineral chelates, I'm not going to know that, even if I'm a very smart individual. And so simply Googling magnesium oxide versus magnesium lysine glycinate chelate, that right there will give you sort of a punch 'em up match. And it'll tell you this one absorbs at 4% and is not very bioavailable and often causes, major laxative issues. And this one, so I think, looking at a few it's tricky for me to answer the question, because if you walk onto a car lot that sells every brand, Mitsubishi, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, Toyota, on and on, right? Like, if you don't know anything about cars, should you buy a Toyota or a Honda or the Mitsubishi or the Kia? Some are better than others when it comes to reliability, resale, materials, but you're not going to know any of that without research. So do your research, ask Grok, ask ChatGPT, but then once you get to the store, look at the labels, Google a comparison. Here's advice I'll tell you that doesn't require any research, though. It doesn't require you punching anything into a phone or a web browser. Maybe your phone's dead. Maybe the vitamin aisle person is on lunch. So this is one of my favorite things to tell people to do. And I'm serious. This is not a joke. I'm dead serious when I say this. Pick up the bottle. I wish shame on me for not having one on my desk. Pick up the bottle, and there's a supplement facts panel. Like every food, every food you buy in America has a nutrition facts panel. Every supplement you buy in America will have a supplement facts panel. It's required by the Food and Drug Administration. It's required by the FDA. Believe it or not, supplements are actually quite regulated by the FDA. We can talk about that later if you're interested. But the supplement facts panel is required to have right below it an other ingredients section. And this is where, they often, like medical professionals and health influencers will often tell you, if it has ingredients you can't pronounce in like a can of soup or something, then you shouldn't eat it. And that I'd say that's kind of good advice. With supplements, it doesn't really apply because most people can't pronounce like diindolmethane or methyl tetrahydrofolate, right? And these are common, like DIM and folate, right? Like those are common nutrients, but the full chemical name of them is word salad, right? It's like word soup. And so I don't tell people, if you can't pronounce the nutrient, don't buy it. No, in fact, you're doing yourself a disservice if you do that. But look at the other ingredients section. If there's a bunch of junk in the other ingredients, that is one of the best ways that you can tell that this is not a quality product. And the reason I say that is, if you're taking anything more than the nutrient that you went to the store to buy, there's a reason it's in there, in your capsule. And the reason is almost never to make you healthier. The reason it's in there is to make that product cheaper and easier to manufacture and to make it more attractive. So when you reach into the bottle and you pinch out a capsule, Americans, like, we want to see the capsule full. We want to feel like we got our money's worth, right? But, a full capsule, I'd be suspicious right off the bat. And here's why I say that. Capsule sizes are standardized. Like you have a a size 0, a size 00, a size 000, a size 1, and a size 2. I think there's also a size 3. But anyway, so you've got these like 6 capsule sizes, right? And they don't change. If a size 000 holds 500 milligrams and it's full, completely full when you buy it, is that just luck? Or did they include 378 milligrams of active ingredients and then just pour in 122 milligrams, almost like 50% of the actives? They just poured in a bunch of what they would call inert powder, right? But is it actually inert? Is it inflammatory? does it bind to the nutrient that you just bought and prevent you from absorbing it? Could your body have a low-grade allergy response to this? Is it grass, generally regarded as safe by the FDA in small amounts? But if you take it 4 times a day, every day for 10 years,
Right.
is that toxic? So that's what I would tell people. Look at that other ingredients section.
Well, and that really actually makes a lot of sense. We didn't talk about this before, but I actually found a supplement from your current company.
Okay.
On my own, because I have been taking a boron supplement for a while.
Can I ask how many milligrams? Boron's fascinating. How many milligrams are you?
Well, I'm using the 5 milligram from Pure Thera.
Yeah.
But the first thing that struck me when I opened that bottle was the size of the capsule was smaller, and that it looked cleaner, like it was white without having a bunch of other stuff in it. Because I've ordered and looked at boron before that was all over the place. Like there's one company, it's orange, and I thought, well, that's really odd. And there's companies that put it into instead of a capsule, it's in a tablet. And tablets, you look at it, it's compressed, and so
let me tell you, they're even generally they're even worse. Like, because now it's not just fillers and excipients and flow agents. Now it's binders. Ingredients meant to hold that thing together. And some people have high stomach acid, but most of us have really low stomach acid and weak digestion and bloating and gas. If you've got low stomach acid, good luck breaking apart that tablet and actually putting it to use. I could talk all day about that, but I love that you're taking boron. And what you're saying is so I see it 1,000 times a day. Yeah.
Well, and it was actually by happenstance, because I was doing the thing that you just described and doing the research and trying to figure out who makes the supplement and who does a good job doing the supplement. And it wasn't until much later, because we've had this schedule for a while. It wasn't until much later when I was actually going through and preparing to talk to you that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Now this is all making sense. And so.
Well, that's a interesting coincidence, serendipity, kind of synchronicity. Yeah. I love those.
So, we've talked about quite a few things here today so far, and I think you've given a few pieces of advice. And so, if we go back and think about the early part of the conversation, we've learned a little bit about the necessity to move combined with proper nutrition. We're adding supplementation because the foods that we eat today are not quite as nutritious as they may have been previously, and it's becoming less likely that you're going to get everything that you need just from having a nutritious diet. There's also this balance thing that we've talked about, because you want to do what's good and you want to do what's right, but you've got a lot of variables to control, and it's better to control some of those variables than to try to control them all and just give up.
Yeah, impossible. Yeah,
we've learned that it's important, if we're going to go to this supplement store and kind of look for these supplements, that number one, it's nice to have a coach or a helper to kind of understand what you're looking for and kind of where to go. Right. They could get lucky and find a James at the store that's going to give them good advice.
We're out there.
But in a world where that doesn't always happen, we've got now learned a few resources on how to do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. If there's anything that we've missed that we should be thinking about, what would that be?
People will often say, well, what supplements should I take? And I will tell everyone listening, that's an impossible question to answer without knowing, what do you eat? Mm-hmm. What are your complaints? What do you really feel good about, but what do you feel bad about? Without knowing, your health history and all about you, no one can say, oh, you should be taking these 6 things. But I think it is really easy in America today, given the stress and the environmental toxins and the depleted soil, and even if you eat a healthy diet, I think it's really easy to tell people, take a multivitamin. Some people will tell you, you don't need that if you eat well. And I will adamantly argue that. I do not agree with that. And we've talked about why. I won't dig any further, but I would say take a multivitamin. And the other thing I would tell people is you should know that multivitamins are not created equal. I don't mean for this to be an advertisement for my company. I'm not going to do that. But what I will tell people is that, so I don't even know the statistic because it's changing by the year. I was actually on your website earlier and you talked about how more people will need like the care of an optometrist in 2025 than, really ever before. I think you said something like 1 in 5 will need to visit an optometrist because of like emerging demographic issues and health issues. And I'm probably getting that not exactly right, but I think it speaks to the world is getting tougher to live in some ways, right? It's nutritionally, it's getting tougher to live in. And so a multivitamin is more important than ever. And there's a genetic issue a lot of us walk around with called MTHFR. I'm sure you've heard of it. MTHFR is an enzyme that helps your body methylate toxins and use B vitamins. I won't go any deeper than that or I'll talk all day. But, 5 years ago when I was writing about MTHFR, it was like up to 25% of American adults. And 3.5 years ago when I was writing about MTHFR, it's like up to 40% of American adults. And I'm telling you, I wrote an article on methylation and menopause the other day. And I swear the statistic was like up to 55 to 60%. And I'm like, what? How do more than half of US adults have this mutation on this gene snippet? Anyway, what that gene snippet does, if you've got a mutation there, which like most people think, I don't have mutated genetics, right? Like it just sounds like such a sci-fi movie concept, but so many of us have a weakened ability to detoxify toxins, but to utilize B vitamins. And if you take a multivitamin with just regular synthetic B vitamins, or even eat foods fortified with regular synthetic B vitamins, they can actually make you worse. They are so like folic acid. You hear about it, like pregnant women need folic acid and everybody needs folic acid. Folic acid is toxic. Your body has to methylate that into methyl tetrahydrofolate, 5-MTHF, in order for your body to use it. But if you've got an MTHFR mutation, which seemingly half of us do, a lot of people did 23andMe or other genetic testing to figure this out. That's when this kind of blew up. You cannot take regular B vitamins. They will give you jitters and headaches and make you feel anxiety or build up to toxicity. So I don't want to ramble on the subject, but so what I'm saying is take a multivitamin, but probably take a methylated multivitamin. There's plenty of good ones out there. I'm not going to push ours, but take a methylated one because there's a really good chance that you or maybe your spouse or SO or kids have an MTHFR mutation. And it's going to not only not help them, but potentially make them worse if you use regular synthetic folic acid or regular synthetic vitamin B12. A multivitamin helps you cover a lot of bases. And there are other essentials. Like I would tell everybody, take an omega-3 fatty acid, take a good magnesium, right? Like almost everybody to do those. If you live in South Florida, like we talked about, maybe you don't need to take vitamin D, but the rest of us, especially up here in Kansas and Minnesota, we need it, those would be probably my advice for everybody. That would be sort of one size fits all.
Well, I really, really have enjoyed this, and we've kind of ticked through a bazillion topics that we could talk about at length, right? So that probably means we should set up time and revisit some of these things and kind of devote some time to each of them, because I think they're really important. And really, it's really nice to be able to talk to someone who has the experience, but to be able to bring it to people in a way that kind of makes sense and that they can really take a piece of the conversation and start to think about how it relates to them, and then start to do their research on how they want to handle these things. And so I got to thank you again for spending part of your day with me. This has been phenomenal.
Thank you, Artis. I'd love to do a deep dive with you anytime. It was a great conversation. Look forward to doing it again.
We'll plan it. If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.